got into motorcycling, I guess I was enamored with motorcycling when I was a kid in Deep River, Ontario, when the Honda fad came out of the craze. And they were selling little Honda step-throughs for $210, and you could buy them on time from the local Esso dealer. And a lot of these high school kids, a little bit older than I was, would be buying these little bikes and bombing around just like the Beach Boys and all that cool stuff. And I remember I was in grade school, public school, and at lunchtime I'd go home, and a friend of mine's sister had a boyfriend who had one of these, and I used to run home, towards home, and try and meet up with him just as he dropped her off, and I could just arrive there just in time to get on the back and get a little ride to my house, a little further along. And I would be running, and I would be following them across, I would running through, shortcuts and trying to make sure that I could time it so I could just run, hey, out of breath, mind giving me a ride or something. And sometimes he would and sometimes he wouldn't. But I learned a lot of good lessons because I know how enamored young people are with motorcycling, and that's what fascinated me with bikes, is just the freedom of mobility, I guess. So that's where it really was bitten by the bug. Our family moved to India, of all places, in 1967. I turned of high school age during that era, between 67 and 70, and flew all the way back to Winnipeg, Manitoba, on my own from India, on a 707 screaming through the air, landing in London and staying overnight there, and then flying to Toronto, flying to Winnipeg, getting my cousin to pick me up. And I lived with my aunt and uncle on their farm for grade 9. And at that time, my parents gave me $200 in American Express traveler's checks, and the first thing I did is went and cashed them in and bought a Honda 50. And the only way to communicate with my parents is to send one of those onion skin airmail letters. And it took about 6 weeks to get to India, and it took about another 6 weeks to get back. So one of the first letters I sent them when I got there in September in Manitoba was this, hey, I bought a Honda 50, and I was all really happy about it, and I was riding around the farm enjoying it and stuff. It was like it wasn't the first bike I'd ridden, but the first bike I actually bought and I still have the bill of sale and the ownership and stuff. And I bought it, and I spent all the $200 I had, which is in 1968 was a huge amount of money for a kid, right? Like a young kid. So I sent this letter off all happy, and then I got a letter back 6 weeks later, so a total of 12 weeks back in December. Sell that bike, we don't want you riding that motorcycle. So I send another letter back. Of course I wasn't going to sell the bike, so it took another 6 weeks to go back there, and then ultimately I rode it around the rest of that fall, winter, and actually what I did is I rode it all winter in Manitoba, which is like crazy cold, but I used to sit and watch television and braid baler twine together on the couch and then wrap it around the wheel of the rear wheel, and then I would have traction in the snow, and I rode around. Necessity is the mother of invention. So yeah, I was just driven to ride that bike, and I made all my own riding gear and just painted it a different color and all sorts of funny things. But that was the start, the beginning of the sensation of having freedom and the mobility to rip around and go where I wanted. And of course, out in the country, it didn't matter if you had a driver's license or not. But I used to get home from school with my cousin, and it was around 4 o'clock, and then we would have to drive lunch out to the guys, my cousins and uncle, who were working in the fields. And they had handed us the keys to the '66 Mustang. And we'd drive down the highway looking underneath the steering wheel with a lunch, with a big glass jug of Kool-Aid and some pickles and sandwiches and stuff. We'd find them out in the field somewhere, pull in, and we'd all sit around and have lunch, and then we'd drive back, driving down these gravel roads, these little kids sitting on pillows in the car, the '66 Mustang. And that's what I grew up in, just always operating machinery. When I first drove a tractor, I couldn't even push the clutch in. It was just crazy. Just driving around in the fields. But it was really loved the sensation of wheels turning underneath me and moving and freedom. And we came back to Canada and settled in Port Elgin, Ontario, and that's when I got my driver's motorcycle license first at 16. Just the day after I would have turned 16, I had a Honda 90, and that was a great era. Like you were talking about getting away with things that you could never get away with now. I mean, I'm the pinnacle of that. I mean, there were just crazy things that we used to get away with. And fortunately, knock on some wood, I dodged quite a few bullets. I'm sure probably would have never survived now doing what I did then. But to get your license, you actually rode to Owen Sound, Ontario, and met a guy in the parking lot. And you rode a few little cones in the parking lot, and then rode around a block. And if you came back, you had your license. Yeah. And I've had it ever since. Same thing. So that was, and you could jump on the fastest bike at the time, which was probably a 750 Norton, which is exactly what I did. My friends had a brand new 72 750 Norton Commando, and I remember riding on the 400 highway, floored, wide open, as fast as it would go, indicated 130 miles an hour, with some old Bell helmet rattling around my head and a cotton jacket, no eye protection, just flying by cars, and no concept of danger or anything. No, nothing. That never even entered the consequences never even entered the equation. It was just crazy. And it went on from there. Fortunately, I got into motocross racing and scrambles, and that kind of channeled me off the street and things like that. And that was really what I was focused on, is the dream of pursuing a racing career from there. And I had a pretty good time. Like I said, this bike here in 1975, 76, I raced on the ice out in Winnipeg when I was living out there, and started working in a shop and had a little bit of success, and it turned out pretty well from there. Then I kind of understood a little bit about how to generate some support to go racing, and the benefits of it and all that, and just continue on from there. I started working at Yamaha Motor Canada in 1980, and friends of mine's, their father was the marketing manager at Yamaha, and they needed someone to go and work the shows, set up their booth at the shows across Canada, and I was there, and I got hired, contract basis, for 4 years, and it was a great job. I traveled across the country and set up these displays and took care of all the details, and I met everybody coast to coast, and that really helped, as far as getting into the industry a little bit. And the day the contract ended, they needed someone in marketing to run the racing program here in Canada, and I was there, and I got hired, and that was it. So from there, I worked in Yamaha Canada for 4 years, and then over in Europe for a few years, and it was good, great experience. I traveled the world with Yamaha and did all sorts of interesting events, Grand Prix motocross and road races, and met all the Yamaha riders and the Dakar riders, and did press launches in Egypt and all sorts of crazy, unimaginable things. I was able to, it really opened a lot of doors, so I'm very grateful for that. And that kind of gave me the idea to do the Dakar a little bit. Met a few quite famous Dakar riders that, I kind of saw how they operated and what they did, and got into that world a little bit. And we actually launched a bike called the Yamaha 750 Super Tenere in Egypt in 1989. And we launched it as a press launch, and I went to Egypt a few times and scouted the roads, and then conducted the press launch. And then in the fall, we did a consumer incentive trip where 60 Super Tenere owners from around Europe won a trip to follow the Rally of the Pharaohs, and that's when I first saw off-road rallying in the desert. That really gave me the idea that it was feasible to do this kind of thing. But that, all these things built up to doing the Dakar in 2001. That was my kind of the pinnacle of my career, I guess, as you might describe it. And it was one of those unfinished, never realized goals that I had, was to ride the Dakar, and I put it all together in the year 2000, and then in 2001, January 1st, was on the starting line on that bike over there, the 650 Honda, and rode 21 days, 10,000 or so kilometers across Africa, and finished it. So that was pretty good, and then my career took a slightly different path. It really gave me a lot of credibility in the industry, and notoriety, I guess, and a little bit of celebrity, and it really changed, because when you're there's a little bit of a pecking order or a hierarchy in motorcycling, and there's everybody's kind of jostling for position and who has credibility or who's more skilled or another. And racing really decides that. You go to an event and you ride, and there's results, and if you finished, everybody kind of recognizes what you've done. And well, the Dakar is kind of, if you said you've done the Dakar, especially Dakar in Africa, the real, what we call the classic from Paris to Dakar, that's throughout the community known as the one, the Dakar. Not that it's any easier or less difficult nowadays in South America, but it's still the African Dakar, where you slept in tents, and sometimes not even tents, and you put up with very little. You're out in the middle of nowhere with, no civilization. It's really like you're on the moon. Now it's a little bit different as far as the number of people and spectators, and you're never really too far from civilization in South America. Still very, very difficult, but it's just different. So the Dakar was one big step that came together, and then we did all sorts of other events all over the world prior to and afterwards. It's all a body of work. It's a body of experience and knowledge, and every time I go do something, I draw on a little bit of experience from every single one of these events or days on a bike that I've done. And the deal is that you still make mistakes. You still can't predict everything, which is the attraction in motorcycling. It's really a process that I don't know if anybody will know everything about riding. There's some very, very good, talented riders, but when you do all sorts of different things in all sorts of different countries, you're always learning. So, this installment of my story is all about the Dakar Rally in 2001. And this is the bike that I rode in the 23rd edition of the Paris to Dakar Rally. The interesting thing about that particular rally is it's the last true classic Paris, France to Dakar, Senegal. So 21 days, about 10,000 kilometers total. And I was quite happy to think back now that I was able to do the last true classic Paris to Dakar. And it really did, that particular rally really had a connection to the original Dakar rallies, which are really, what the whole mystique and the aura, the magic of the Dakar is based on these adventurers back in 1979, setting off in the desert with virtually no support and street bikes. Some guys were on street bikes with no preparation or anything, and heading off across the African Sahara to Dakar, Senegal. And it was really almost no organization, very loosely organized. And the stories that all those people came back with from the first era of Dakars really it still continues. That's what people dream about doing. The Dakar is recognized as being the pinnacle of off-road races in the world, in the history of the world. There's been nothing like it. And whether it's changed over the years, it's gone to South America and it's changed formats and all these things. But really, when you talk about the Dakar Rally, it's recognized worldwide. I was able to put it all together in the year 2000, preparing for it, and 2001, January 2001, New Year's Day, Paris, France, heading south towards Spain and then Morocco, Mali, Mauritania, and then Senegal, 10,000 kilometers. And it really did change my history, my career path, if you want to call it a career, in motorcycling, because I was the first Canadian to finish the darn thing, and that was a pretty big deal, and it still is. On this motorcycle, it's virtually untouched since it crossed the finish line. And I have a book out. My credibility, my stature in motorcycling is all based on finishing the Dakar Rally. Even though I've done all sorts of other things, the Dakar really is incomparable as far as credibility goes, and testament to who you are as an off-road rider. That's the Dakar. It really was quite an adventure. I mean, it didn't go smoothly for me, and at the time I thought, wow, why is all this stuff happening to me? But in hindsight, it actually was very good, because I came out with a really good story that warranted a book, and it's done quite well. But yeah, it was a great experience. I was really enjoying it, reveling in the whole aura of the event and meeting people, and it really was. I was caught up in it a lot. It was really the most important thing that was going on in my life at that time.
and it took a while. It took a lot of getting used to and trying to figure it out. And it was, in those days you really felt like you were on the moon as far as being out in the African desert. So you didn't have the connection that you do now in the Dakar in South America. I mean, you're always near a town. There's always spectators nearby. You're never alone. But in Africa, it's really serious business. Further along, we crossed from Morocco to Mauritania, and you go through an area called the Western Sahara that's disputed. And there's all sorts of refugee camps and terrorists and things like that. And you go through these areas, and they specifically tell you to not stray outside the marked trail. And sure enough, during my Dakar, a support truck pulled out of the marked road across the desert and hit a landmine and blew the front wheel off the truck. So that's how serious it is. And there's all sorts of military presence all through Morocco, Mauritania, with jeeps with machine guns at the border crossings and all sorts of things like that. Military everywhere. So it really was what I consider, serious business, I guess. It's not playtime anymore. The Dakar is serious business. And I learned a lot about myself. I mean, it was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I really had to dig deep, and you really find out who you are as a person and what your limits are when you start getting pushed to the limits. And there's points where you struggle and fight and deal with just uncomfort and heat and bumps and tiredness and fatigue, and all those things all compound. And I think the goal is to just see yourself through all of those hardships and keep going. And the alternative is to quit, which is, I often say, it's far easier to put up with 3 weeks of hardship than a lifetime of disappointment. So that's what I looked at it was, it was difficult, but I'm also actually used to hardship, and especially on motorcycles, and I stuck with it, dealt with all the problems I had. I had a whole bunch of different problems, but ultimately got to the end, and it was very satisfying to do. It was a challenge, and there's all sorts of different types of conditions, and sleeping in a tent for 3 weeks, and no comforts really. Food's pretty good, but the good thing was I was able to sleep, full nights of sleep, so I would get in most nights before it got dark, which once it gets dark in the desert, your problems compound to all sorts of difficulties with navigation. But I was able to sleep and get well rested every day, and ate good food and felt pretty normal, and then was able to feel good in the morning and continue on. So that's what you have to do. Just never give up and just keep pressing on, moving forward, keeping time on your side, so that if you do have a problem, you can have enough time to fix it and then keep going. And I think it's been good. There's a lot of elements to it that are attractive. There's adventure, there's competition, there's challenging yourself, and that's good. That's a benefit of it. I think that's if it could offer advice to anybody, is to try and explore your limits and try and figure out what they are, because then you know what you're capable of doing. And if you don't push those limits, then you really, kind of slide along without really discovering what you're capable of, your real maximum potential is. So that's what the Dakar was for me, is myself and this motorcycle and that metal case there, and it's 3 weeks of adventure, and then the end result was I became someone that I wasn't necessarily going to be as a result. It really did change my life for the better, and it opened just unlimited doors. Opportunities came my way as a result, and it's a lot to do with just the credibility of everybody in my world in motorcycling recognizing what that accomplishment is, and who you are as a person.
If I could say one thing, I'd like to hopefully inspire people to do whatever it is, whether it's in motorcycling or not, inspire them to lead an interesting life. I mean, it's a burden to have to lead an interesting life, but I think all gentlemen should lead an interesting life. And you owe it to yourself to do interesting things with your life. We have great opportunity. Travel is within reach of everybody on the planet, basically. And motorcycling motorcycles can facilitate that in such an easy manner. It's such a great way to travel through time and space. It affords such maneuverability and such freedom, and the sensation of riding you feel every meter of distance that you go, every kilometer per hour of speed, and the smells and the sensations. There's really no other way of traveling at that speed and get so much out of it. I mean, you really experience a lot on a motorcycle, and you can travel at such a speed that you experience a lot in a day. I mean, on a bicycle you could experience something the same, but you'd only be going a fraction of the speed you could go. You can travel great distances, and the other thing with motorcycling is that people approach you differently. You're a bit of an adventurer or a warrior or whatever, and you're human. You're not closed and locked in a car with the windows rolled up. You're actually out there. People recognize you and look at you, and people want to come and talk to you and ask you about your adventure and where you're from and all that, because you're out there. You're more exposed. You're not hidden, and putting yourself out on a pedestal to show everybody what you're doing. And that's what's interesting about it. And there's not that many activities in the world where you do that. You can do that. You can go surfing or skiing or something like that, but that's a private experience, a little bit more or less. Motorcycling is something where you are out there for the world to see, and it's a genuine experience. I've always said try to quantify what the attraction is to humans. Why do we love to do this? Because there is some risk involved. There's some expense. It's a little bit selfish, unless you take your significant other on the back or on a motorcycle beside you, or your friends, and share that experience, which is a big part of me. It's really a selfish activity because you're on the bike and you're experiencing it. But if you look at the concept of motorcycling as a shared experience, it's much better. For me, the sensation of riding is still very, very attractive. I love the sensation of being in control of that bike and trying new things on it, and the sensation of power and speed. But if you look at it like it is really is social first, and 75-80% of the experience of the fun is because you're with your friends and you're sharing this experience, that really is where I'm at these days. And there's so few genuine experiences in the world that are left, because we're in a digital world now. All of our friends we know on Facebook, on what they post on Facebook and things like that. So the actual camaraderie and fellowship that is involved in motorcycling is still that genuine one-on-one, face-to-face experience. And that's what I'm attracted to. Is it's a little bit old school, it's a little bit old style, but I think that as humans we love that. We love to be with other people, and we share this common interest. It doesn't matter where you are, what you do for a living, or who you are, or where you come from. If you're on a bike, we're all in it together. And I think that's really maybe a little bit overlooked as far as the attraction goes. I mean, the other side of it is you can get into some real details on why I think we're attracted, but it boils down to one thing. Humans love to anticipate. We're hardwired to want to anticipate everything. It's a survival instinct. It's an instinct that we have inside of us. And when you go motorcycling, and it exercises those instincts that you use to anticipate. You anticipate your surroundings. You anticipate what's going to happen before it happens. And when you come back and prove to yourself and the rest of the world that you're a capable rider, you've proven to everybody, including yourself, that you're capable of anticipating your surroundings and doing a good job of it. And that's instinctually, the reptile part of our brain, that's what motorcycling does for us as humans. And it took a while to understand that. It clicked that when you realize that humans love to anticipate our surroundings. We're hardwired to love it. We're always looking around. I love noticing things and preventing things from happening, or predicting things that happen. And that's very satisfying to do. So for me personally, riding my Husky 250 in the single track trails in southern Ontario, black dirt, beautiful flow, shifting first, second, third, brake, turn the corner, leap over the bumps, flow around through a whole forest, to me that is a pinnacle of anticipation, and that is a pinnacle of a satisfying ride. And then of course if you look at all sorts of other things about preparing for a ride, preparation for an event is half the fun. And that's all about anticipating, imagining what you'll need on a ride to Baja or Japan or Morocco or anywhere. That whole process of preparing is you exercising your instincts of anticipation. Okay, I'll pack this, what will I wear, what will I need, what will the temperature be like, what tires will I use, how will I prepare my bike. And when you go to an event like that and it unfolds in front of you properly, the way it should, and you come back with a nice result from it, that's the whole process explained in a nutshell as far as anticipation goes. Assembling all this information in the hard drive and then noting it and then using it again. That again proves that you anticipated very well the first time and are better prepared the second time. That's why motorcycling is a constant source of learning. You're always learning about something. You're never short on improving your riding skills or doing something different. It's a little bit like chasing the perfect wave on surfing. You're chasing the perfect conditions for riding on a specific bike or with a certain event you want to do, or if you have fortunate to have a nice win or something like that, that's perfect, because not only have you anticipated well for yourself, but you've proven to the world you're capable of doing that, which is even better. So I'll tell you one of these really good stories. Riding Southern Ontario Enduros is just about as good as it gets. Perfect day, crisp weather, you're riding with your buddies, fresh tracks in the sand and stuff. Well, I remember and you can ride all day. You can ride 8 hours, and if you have 1 millisecond of perfection, that's all it needs to make you want to come back. So this perfect millisecond of perfection where I can still picture it. I was riding 650 Honda. We were riding in beautiful wet sand, come around a corner, did a nice beautiful wheelie over a nice bump, did a big power slide, and then looked back and my buddy saw it all. So I even have proof that it was perfection. It's as good as it gets. So those little instances, it might have ridden not so good prior to and afterwards, but as long as you had 1 little millisecond of perfection, that's what keeps you going back, because it's so addicting to feel that perfect anticipation, perfect execution of everything fell together perfectly. And what I notice is that, off-road riding is a lot of mistakes, constant mistakes. But usually what happens is, in a race, it's the person who makes the fewest number of mistakes actually does best. So you have to accept the fact that mistakes are going to happen. You're going to fall. You're going to flounder around in sand and rocks and stuff, and everybody does it. But it rarely goes perfect. But when it does, it is so satisfying. It compensates for all these mistakes that you make, and mistakes are how you learn. And if you're not making mistakes, you really are not trying. Because you won't make any mistakes sitting on the couch, right? Maybe choose the wrong channel on TV, but you're watching your life go roll out in front of someone else. And everybody makes their own choices. I made this choice, and I have encouraged my friends, if they're saying a eulogy at my funeral, please tell everybody that I've made all my own choices, and I'm completely happy with how it unfolded. And I think that you can't ask for much more than that. So there you go. Simple as that. I'm really into motorcycles. It really is my life from A to Z, and I've dabbled in all sorts of different types of motorcycling. We go adventure riding to Baja, or racing in Japan or somewhere like that. And I also like the vintage side of it, but I really am not trying not to dwell on the past, rest on my laurels or anything like that. For example, this bike here is a 1974 Husqvarna CR125, and when I bought this particular bike brand new in 1974, and I bought it again 2 years ago. So I bought the same bike I owned, and this is kind of a pinnacle of what I really like. Is a vintage bike. It was a pivotal bike in my career, because on this motorcycle I raced it in Manitoba on the ice. I really enjoyed my first racing success on this very bike, and I have pictures of it. And I was in the Winnipeg Tribune, winning races and stuff on this bike. And then a couple of years ago, I put an ad on Kijiji looking for it, and a guy responded. Sure enough, it's the same bike. I paid double what I paid for it originally, brand new, and now it's kind of almost finished being restored. And it's one of my treasures. What it does is it's a tangible reminder of a great era. So the 60s, 70s, 80s was my era of racing, where it was really a big part of my life. Less so now. It's still what I do, but I'm not. I don't devote 100% of my day to motorcycles. Only about 50% of the day, which is still crazy. But anyways, this kind of story is really a good one, where you can find the bike that you used to own, and all the memories come back because it's a tangible reminder of that era. So I collect bikes that are, or save bikes that are kind of important, perhaps in a bike that I would have ridden at a significant event that I rode, or a reminder of an era or something like that. And I think that's good because someday I'll retire from racing and hopefully have these reminders of days gone by, and enjoy them and share them with other people and things like that. But yeah, 50 years of riding this year. So 2018 will be my 51st riding year of motorcycles. I've spent more than that. A huge percentage of my whole life is riding motorcycles, and all over the world, and it's been great. I've enjoyed, and still to this day enjoy, great experiences with all sorts of friends, and traveling all over the place, riding bikes, exploring the world, meeting new people, sharing things, sharing the experience with my friends, and traveling. Travel is a big part of it, and competing in events once in a while, and having a lot of fun. So yeah, it's been, I would never ever complain about what motorcycling has done for me, and the opportunities it has afforded. Just unbelievable. You would never be able to write a playbook on what I got to do as a result of being involved in motorcycling.